Vanessa had everything most people only dreamed of: a thriving career as a renowned fashion designer, a luxurious villa in Beverly Hills, and a husband who adored her. From the outside, her life looked like a carefully curated masterpiece, a perfect blend of success, wealth, and love. Every morning she woke up to the soft glow of the California sun filtering through their massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the pristine white marble floors of their modern home. The sleek designer furniture, the framed high-fashion magazine covers showcasing her work, and the walk-in closet filled with luxury brands were all testaments to the empire she had built. She and Eric, her husband of 10 years, were the ultimate power couple, respected, admired, and seemingly unshakable. He was a dedicated financial analyst, always methodical and practical, ensuring their future was secure. Together, they attended elite galas, traveled first class, and dined in Michelin-starred restaurants. They had the kind of life that others envied. Yet, beneath the surface, something was missing. Despite all the glamour, Vanessa couldn't shake a growing sense of restlessness. Lately, she found herself feeling an unexplainable void, a gnawing hunger for something different, something thrilling. It wasn't that she didn't love Eric. She did. He was attentive, kind, and had stood by her through every high and low. Yet, deep down, there was a secret, an unspoken desire that had begun to consume her thoughts, a curiosity she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried. At first it was just a fleeting idea, a thought that crossed her mind in passing. But as the months went by, the thought turned into an obsession. It crept into her dreams, into quiet moments when she was alone, into the spaces between her and Eric in bed at night. She wanted to know what it would be like to be with a black man. The thought terrified her as much as it excited her. It wasn't about love, nor was it about dissatisfaction with Eric. It was purely a curiosity, a yearning to explore something unknown, something outside of the pristine, predictable world she had built. She had always played by the rules, always stayed within the lines, but for once, she wanted to break free, to experience something raw, untamed, and completely outside her comfort zone. The more she tried to suppress it, the more it consumed her. It became impossible to ignore, a whisper in the back of her mind, growing louder with each passing day. Vanessa knew she had two choices: bury the desire and pretend it didn't exist, or confront it head-on. But confronting it meant risking everything. It meant revealing a truth that could shatter the life she and Eric had so carefully built. Would he understand? Would he be repulsed? Would it destroy them? These questions haunted her as she prepared to make the most difficult confession of her life. That evening, as Vanessa stood in their open-concept living room, sipping a glass of wine, she knew there was no turning back. Eric was seated on the plush leather couch, focused on his laptop, unaware that his world was about to be flipped upside down. The soft hum of jazz played in the background, the scent of their lavender candles filling the air. A perfect, peaceful night in their elegant home. But tonight, peace would be shattered. Tonight, everything would change. Vanessa set her wineglass down on the marble countertop, her hands trembling slightly as she turned to face Eric. The weight of the words she was about to say made her chest feel tight, but she had already decided. There was no turning back now. She had rehearsed this moment in her head over and over again, imagining different ways he might react, different ways she might soften the blow. But now that she was standing in front of him, all her carefully planned words disappeared. Eric, still absorbed in his laptop, barely noticed her hesitation at first. His dark-rimmed glasses rested low on his nose as he typed, his face calm, unaware of the storm about to come crashing down. "Eric," Vanessa finally said, her voice quieter than she intended. He glanced up at her with a tired but affectionate smile, pushing his laptop aside. "Yeah, babe? Everything okay?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding, though she knew everything was about to be far from okay. The soft glow of the recessed lighting cast warm shadows around the living room, making the moment feel eerily intimate, like a secret being unraveled in slow motion. She swallowed hard before finally forcing the words out. I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it. Eric's expression shifted, concern flickering across his face as he sat up straighter. You're scaring me, Vanessa. What's going on? She took a deep breath, her pulse hammering. I have this feeling, a curiosity, and I can't ignore it anymore. Eric frowned, his analytical mind already working through possibilities. Curiosity about what? Vanessa's throat went dry. Saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. I want to know what it's like to be with a black man. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The air between them thickened, the sounds of the city outside their window fading into the background. Eric just stared at her, blinking as if he hadn't heard correctly. His usual composed, logical demeanor cracked slightly, confusion clouding his deep brown eyes. What? His voice was low, almost disbelieving. I've been thinking about it for a long time. I don't know why. I just need to know. Her voice faltered as she saw the hurt settling in his expression. Eric exhaled sharply, rubbing his hand over his jaw. He let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. So, let me get this straight. You've been fantasizing about sleeping with a black guy while lying next to me every night? Is that what you're telling me? Vanessa flinched. It's not like that. I love you, Eric. This has nothing to do with love. Nothing to do with love? He scoffed, standing up abruptly, the frustration in his movements making her stomach clench. You don't think this affects us? Our marriage? Jesus, Vanessa. He ran a hand through his neatly styled hair, pacing. Why now? Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to lie to you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want this to be some secret I carry for the rest of my life. I need to be honest with you. Eric stopped pacing and turned to her, his jaw tight. His eyes, which were usually filled with warmth and patience, now held a storm of emotions. Anger, pain, disbelief. So, what are you expecting me to do? Just let you go out and do this? To help you? Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it, her silence speaking louder than any words could. Eric let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Unbelievable. He turned away from her, gripping the edge of the counter like he needed to steady himself. For the first time in their marriage, Vanessa felt like she had truly lost him. The distance between them wasn't just emotional now. It was physical, tangible, like an invisible wall had been built the moment she spoke those words. Then, to her shock, Eric let out a slow breath, and after what felt like an eternity, he turned back toward her. His face was unreadable now, his expression guarded. If this is what you need, he said finally, his voice cold, then I'll help you. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. What? I'll find someone for you, Eric repeated, the bitterness in his voice unmistakable. But after this, we never speak of it again. She searched his face, looking for some sign that he was joking, that he would snap back to reality and tell her she was being ridiculous. But he didn't. His expression was carved from stone. Vanessa had wanted honesty. She had wanted transparency, but she hadn't expected this. And in that moment, as Eric walked away, the reality of what she had started began to sink in. Their marriage would never be the same again. The days that followed were steeped in an unsettling silence between Vanessa and Eric. They still shared the same space, still moved around their lavish Beverly Hills villa as if life was normal, but the air between them was thick with tension. Conversations became clipped. routine interactions devoid of warmth. Eric was distant, his usual affectionate gestures gone, replaced by a cold efficiency. He wasn't fighting with her, not in the traditional sense, but the quiet spoke volumes. And yet, despite his inner turmoil, he kept his word. Eric, ever the methodical planner, approached the search like he would a business deal. He spent late nights on his laptop, scrolling through private forums, making discreet inquiries, finding the right man for the job. At first it felt surreal. Why was he even doing this? Was it out of spite? Was it his way of detaching himself emotionally, of reducing this to a transaction instead of a betrayal? Or was it some last, twisted attempt to hold on to the marriage, to control the inevitable, rather than let it spiral out of his hands? He didn't have the answers, and deep down, he didn't want to examine them too closely. After days of careful searching, he found Marcus, a 35-year-old personal trainer, well-built, self-assured, and known for his discretion. Marcus wasn't some random stranger. He was a professional in his own right, a man who had experience in handling situations like this. No emotions, no complications, just a one-time arrangement. Eric contacted him and the deal was made. Vanessa, meanwhile, was drowning in her own internal conflict. She had asked for this, pushed for it, but now that it was happening, she felt an unease settling deep in her stomach. Every part of this felt like crossing an invisible line, one she might never be able to return from. Then, one evening, Eric walked in, his expression unreadable. He set his phone on the counter, met her gaze, and said the words that made her heart hammer in her chest. "I found someone." And just like that, the fantasy she had nurtured for months was about to become a reality. The night arrived with an unbearable weight hanging in the air. Vanessa had spent the day aimlessly wandering through the house, pretending to keep herself busy, but no amount of distraction could silence the growing sense of unease settling in her chest. This was happening. There was no stopping it now. She had wanted this, asked for it. Yet now, standing in front of her mirror, smoothing out the silk of her dress with trembling fingers, she couldn't ignore the creeping fear slithering through her veins. The once exciting idea now felt like something else entirely. Something dangerous, irreversible. Eric, on the other hand, had been quiet all day. He didn't ask if she was nervous. He didn't tell her how he felt. He simply went about his evening like a man fulfilling an obligation, one he despised but had chosen to see through. He sat in the living room, stiff and unmovable, nursing a glass of whiskey as the city lights twinkled through the panoramic windows. The sound of the ice clinking in his glass was the only thing filling the space between them. Then, at exactly 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. Vanessa froze. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she swore Eric could hear it from across the room. She turned to him, searching for some sign, some hesitation, some indication that this was insane and they could still stop this. But he didn't move right away. He just sat there, swirling the whiskey in his glass before finally rising to his feet. Without a word, he walked to the door and pulled it open. And there he was. Marcos. He was taller than she had imagined, his presence commanding, his stance exuding effortless confidence. He was dressed casually, fitted dark jeans and a crisp button-up that framed his muscular build. But it wasn't just his looks. It was the energy he carried, a quiet self-assurance, a sharp awareness of the tension crackling in the room. His dark brown eyes met Vanessa's, and in that instant, something shifted. "You must be Vanessa," Marcus said, his voice smooth, deep, unwavering. She swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes." Marcus's gaze flickered to Eric, who stood stiffly beside her. He extended a hand. "Eric, right?" Eric hesitated for just a second before shaking his hand. A brief, firm shake that felt more like a formality than a greeting. "That's me." His voice was unreadable, distant. He stepped aside. "Come in." Marcus entered, his presence filling the space in a way that made the room feel smaller, hotter, more suffocating. Vanessa could feel Eric watching her as Marcus walked past, catching the subtle way she reacted to him, the flush on her cheeks, the way she shifted her weight. "Let's sit," Eric said, his tone clipped. They moved to the sleek leather couches in the living room, but the atmosphere was anything but comfortable. The three of them sat in a triangle of tension, one man broken, another indifferent, and a woman at the center of it all. And for the first time, Vanessa wasn't sure if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. The silence in the room was almost unbearable. The three of them sat in a triangle of tension, the air thick with emotions none of them dared to name. Vanessa could feel Eric's eyes on her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. Instead, she focused on Marcus, who sat across from them with the calm composure of a man who had been in situations like this before. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't flustered. He was simply waiting. Marcus leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Before we go any further," he said, his voice smooth but firm, "I need to make sure we're all on the same page." Vanessa nodded quickly, but Eric remained motionless, his expression unreadable. Marcus glanced at him before continuing. "I respect the fact that you're married," he said plainly. "I don't do drama, and I don't do complications. This is a one-time thing. No strings, no expectations. We keep it clean, we keep it respectful, and when it's over, we move on. Agreed?" Vanessa's fingers curled into her lap. The clarity in his voice made this feel real in a way that was almost jarring. No longer a fantasy, no longer just a dangerous thought. This was happening. Eric exhaled sharply, crossing his arms. "Understood." Marcus's gaze flicked back to Vanessa. "And you?" She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes, agreed." There was a pause, then Marcus leaned back, satisfied. "Good." He looked at Eric again, his tone measured. "Now, it's up to you. Some men like to be involved, some prefer to step away. What do you want?" Eric's jaw clenched. His knuckles were white where they gripped his knee. He let out a slow breath before standing abruptly. "I'll be in the other room." Vanessa turned toward him instinctively. "Eric?" He shook his head. "Just do what you need to do." His voice was cold, distant, almost unrecognizable. And without another word, he walked out of the room, leaving Vanessa and Marcus alone. And with that, the door to her marriage closed behind him. As the door to the living room clicked shut behind Eric, an eerie silence settled over the space. Vanessa felt like the room had just shrunk around her, as if the walls were inching closer, trapping her in the reality of what was about to happen. She had spent so long fantasizing about this moment, imagining the thrill, the excitement, the rush of stepping outside the boundaries of her carefully constructed life, but now, as she sat on the couch across from Marcus, her body thrummed with a nervous energy that bordered on fear. Marcus studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering but not unkind. "You okay?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. Vanessa swallowed hard and nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. "Yeah," she said, but the word felt weightless. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, watching her carefully. "You don't have to do this," he said, and something in his voice made it clear that he meant it. "If you're not sure, we stop now." The offer, though genuine, only made the weight in Vanessa's chest heavier. She had made a choice, and choices, once made, couldn't always be undone. She exhaled shakily, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I want this," she said, barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, as if waiting for her to find her own conviction. He didn't rush her, didn't reach for her immediately. Instead, he let her come to him. Vanessa stood slowly, walking toward him as if testing the ground beneath her feet. She had never been unfaithful to Eric, had never even considered it before this. But this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about breaking free. Or at least, that's what she had convinced herself. When she finally reached him, Marcus stood as well, towering over her, his presence overwhelming in a way that made her breath hitch. His warmth, his scent, something rich and intoxicating laced with the faintest trace of spice, filled her senses. He raised a hand, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch deliberate, patient. Vanessa shivered under his fingers. It had been a long time since she had felt truly desired, truly craved in this way. Eric loved her, yes, but their relationship had become routine, predictable, safe. This felt anything but safe. She lifted her chin slightly, meeting Marcus's eyes with something between defiance and surrender. That was all the permission he needed. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, a slow, deliberate claiming. She melted into the kiss before she even had time to second-guess it. The warmth of his hands settled on her waist, strong and steady, grounding her in the reality of what she was doing. And just like that, the line she had been so afraid of crossing was already behind her. Her hands moved on their own, trailing up his arms, over his broad shoulders, feeling the strength beneath his skin. The intensity in his touch made her feel small, delicate, something she hadn't felt in years. A quiet moan escaped her lips, and Marcus responded by deepening the kiss, his grip tightening as he pulled her flush against him. For a fleeting moment, the weight of reality disappeared. There was no Eric, no years of marriage, no consequences. There was only this moment, this feeling, this body against hers. But then, somewhere in the depths of her mind, a ghost of doubt stirred. She pulled away slightly, her breath coming in short gasps. Marcus searched her face, sensing the hesitation. "You good?" he asked again, softer this time. Vanessa forced a nod. "Yes," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was saying it to him or to herself. Marcus didn't push. He waited, his patience steady as if he understood the battle happening inside her. And then, with deliberate slowness, he took her hand, guiding her toward the bedroom. Vanessa let him. She let herself be led. She let herself forget. And as the bedroom door closed behind them, she knew. There was no going back. The morning after felt hollow. The once grand villa with its pristine white walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the hills of Beverly Hills now felt cold and lifeless. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, suffocating in its weight. Vanessa lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her body still tingling from the night before, yet her mind was clouded with something far heavier. Guilt, the rush, the thrill, the forbidden excitement. It had all seemed so intoxicating in the moment, but now, in the unforgiving light of day, she couldn't shake the gnawing emptiness in her chest. Beside her, the space where Eric had slept for the past 10 years was empty. He hadn't come to bed. Vanessa wasn't sure if he had even stayed in the house. She pulled the silk sheets tighter around her body, as if they could shield her from the reality of what she had done. The realization of it all hit her like a tidal wave. This was real. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. She had crossed the line, and now she had to live with it. The sound of clinking glass in the kitchen made her sit up. Eric was home. Her stomach twisted as she slid out of bed, wrapping her robe around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. She took a deep breath and made her way down the hallway, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. Eric was sitting at the kitchen counter, a cup of coffee in front of him, his posture stiff. He looked up as she entered, his blue-gray eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. Something was broken. Something she had broken. "Good morning," she said, hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric didn't respond right away. He just stared at her, studying her face like he was trying to recognize the woman standing in front of him. Then finally, he spoke, his voice eerily calm. "Did you get what you wanted?" The question was a slap to the face. Vanessa felt her throat tighten. No, that was the truth. She hadn't gotten what she wanted. What she wanted was Eric. The man who had stood by her side for 10 years. The man who had given her his love, his loyalty. But she had thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of curiosity. "Eric, she started, but he cut her off. "Don't." He stood up, grabbing his keys from the counter. "I need some air." Before she could stop him, he was gone, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing through the empty house. Vanessa stood frozen in place, staring at the spot where he had been, the walls closing in on her. The house was no longer a home. It was just a reminder of everything she had lost. Vanessa sat motionless at the kitchen counter long after Eric had left, staring at the untouched cup of coffee growing cold in front of her. The silence in the house was deafening, each passing second stretching into an eternity. She had broken something that could never be repaired. She had known, deep down, that this would change everything, but she had naively believed that they could move past it, that Eric would somehow understand. But what was there to understand? She had betrayed him, not just physically, but emotionally, in a way that had shattered the very foundation of their marriage. Hours passed. She tried to keep herself busy, picking up things around the house, folding laundry that didn't need folding, wiping down already spotless counters, but nothing could distract her from the aching emptiness sitting in the pit of her stomach. Every glance at their shared space, the framed wedding photo on the mantel, the soft indent on Eric's side of the couch, was a reminder of everything they had built together, and everything she had just destroyed. When Eric finally returned that evening, the tension in the house became suffocating. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence, just walked straight to the bedroom, packed a suitcase, and zipped it shut with a finality that sent ice through her veins. "Eric, please," Vanessa whispered, stepping toward him. He didn't stop, didn't hesitate, didn't even look at her. "I need space," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. Panic surged through her. Space? No, this wasn't just about space. This was the beginning of the end. "We can fix this," she pleaded, reaching for his arm, but he pulled away. "No, Vanessa." His voice cracked, just slightly, but when he finally looked at her, his eyes were empty. "We can't." And just like that, he walked out the door. Vanessa stood frozen, the walls of the house closing in on her. For the first time, she understood the true cost of what she had done. The days that followed felt like an endless void, a slow suffocation beneath the weight of her own regrets. Eric was gone. His absence was like a gaping hole in the house, in her life, in her very existence. She had never realized how much space his presence filled until now, until the silence became unbearable. No sound of his morning coffee brewing, no rustle of newspaper pages, no soft footsteps coming down the hall. Just an empty villa. Too big, too quiet, too cold. Vanessa tried to go about her routine, tried to convince herself that life hadn't just crashed down around her. She threw herself into work, spending long hours in her design studio, sketching furiously, hoping that if she filled her time, she could outrun the thoughts chasing her. But creativity failed her. For the first time in years, the passion that had once fueled her career felt meaningless. Nights were worse. The bedroom felt haunted. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her own choices crushing her. The bed was too big without Eric beside her, his warmth, his steady breathing, his love. She reached for her phone 100 times, hovering over his name, fingers trembling, desperate to hear his voice. But what would she say? I'm sorry, I made a mistake, please come back? None of it would erase what she had done. She stopped eating, stopped answering calls. Even her friends noticed something was wrong. They sent texts, left voicemails. Vanessa, are you okay? Where have you been? She ignored them all, because how could she explain this? How could she tell them that she had gambled everything for a fleeting desire, only to lose the one thing that truly mattered? The walls of the house, once filled with laughter, with love, now felt like a prison, and no matter how hard she tried to escape herself, the guilt followed her everywhere. The letter arrived on a Monday afternoon. Vanessa almost didn't open it. She had been avoiding reality, floating through the days in a haze of regret, pretending that if she just stayed still, everything might somehow fix itself. But as she held the envelope in her hands, her name printed in Eric's unmistakable handwriting, she knew. Her hands trembled as she tore it open, her breath catching in her throat before she even read the words. It was short, brutal in its simplicity. Vanessa, I've done a lot of thinking over the past few weeks, and I've come to a decision. I can't come back. What happened between us is something I can't move past. I'll always care about you, but we can't fix this. I'm filing for divorce. I'm sorry. Iris. The words blurred as her vision filled with tears. It was over. Not just the silence, not just the space between them, their entire life together, the love, the memories, the 10 years they had built as husband and wife, all reduced to a few lines on a piece of paper. Vanessa crumpled the letter in her hands, gasping for air as sobs racked her body. She had asked for this. She had pushed for it, and now she had exactly what she had wanted. But as she sank to the floor, clutching the letter like it was the only thing left of him, she realized it had never been what she wanted at all. Vanessa sat alone in the villa that no longer felt like home, surrounded by the remnants of a life she had shattered with her own hands. The divorce papers lay on the table, staring back at her like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. The silence in the house wasn't just the absence of Eric. It was the absence of love, trust, and everything that had once made this place feel warm. She had thought she was chasing something exciting, something new, but in the end, she had traded a fleeting desire for a lifetime of regret. For weeks, she replayed every moment in her head. What had she been thinking? What had made her believe that acting on an impulse, on a fantasy, was worth risking the one man who had always been there for her? She had thought it was just curiosity, just something she needed to experience, but at what cost? The cost, she now understood, was irreparable. Eric hadn't just left their marriage, he had left her, and she couldn't blame him. Some betrayals cut too deep. The words of Marcus echoed in her mind. This doesn't define you. At the time, she had clung to that idea, convincing herself that what she had done was just an experience, a mistake she could move past. But now she knew better. Some choices define everything. Some choices don't just change a moment. They change who you are. Vanessa had thought she wanted freedom, but now she realized freedom without love was just emptiness. She reached for a pen, hovering over the divorce papers. She had no choice but to sign them. Eric was never coming back. Her marriage was over. And now, she had to learn how to live with herself. The story of Vanessa and Eric serves as a sobering reminder that impulses have consequences, and some choices cannot be undone. Vanessa believed she was simply satisfying a curiosity, but in doing so she underestimated the weight of betrayal. Desires are fleeting, but trust is fragile. And once broken, it rarely heals the same way. The lesson here is that relationships are built on more than just love. They require loyalty, respect, and emotional consideration. Vanessa's mistake wasn't just an act of infidelity, it was the dismissal of her husband's worth, the assumption that he would recover from a wound she inflicted. But not all wounds heal, and not all love can survive betrayal. Eric's departure and ultimate decision to divorce reflect another important truth: knowing when to walk away. Some damage is irreversible, and sometimes the best way to respect yourself is to leave a situation that no longer serves you. In the end, Vanessa learned that what she thought she wanted wasn't worth what she lost. The thrill of a moment was nothing compared to the lifetime of love she had thrown away. Some lessons come too late, but they are learned nonetheless.